So I'll give a general situation update in terms of events and where we are looking further. So in terms of rockets continue to be fired towards Israel. The last few hours saw a barrage of rockets towards Israel, unfortunately leading to 2 Israeli fatalities, civilian fatalities in Israel, in southern Israel, in an agricultural area, rural area in the Gaza envelope. As well as that, additional Israelis wounded, bringing the number, the death toll on the Israeli side up to 11. 11 deaths directly a result of rocket fire from Gaza. In terms of numbers, we're talking about 3,300 rockets fired at Israel so far from all parts of the Gaza Strip, from the north, the center, and the south, the majority being fired from the north. Out of those rockets fired, approximately between 450 and 500 of those rockets that were fired by Hamas and Islamic Jihad, 450 or 500 fell short inside the Gaza Strip, causing casualties inside the Gaza Strip. Fortunately, we are still happy to confirm that the Iron Dome continues to intercept at 90%, slightly above 90% successful interception rate. That is absolutely strategic and of utmost importance. You can imagine the situation had it not, or the situation of casualties in Israel, had it not been for that successful interception rate. The main effort of the IDF, other than obviously defending civilians on the ground against various attempts by Hamas to launch attacks in the air using the Iron Dome and in all other domains, including at sea. Other than the defensive effort, we are of course conducting quite an extensive offensive effort as well. Our aim is to degrade Hamas's military capabilities. And I want to address pictures that I'm sure many of you have either seen or broadcasted yourself of events and pictures coming out of Gaza. Some of them are not easy to watch and they're disturbing, and there's lots of damage to infrastructure. I want to explain them, and I want to explain what the military target is that we are aspiring to inflict damage on. Hamas has spent many years, at least 5, but probably more than that, in enhancing or digging and enhancing and eventually creating an underground network referred casually to as the metro, but that's a bit of a misnomer because the metro usually in other countries serves civilians. This Hamas metro, it serves only the militants, only the terrorists of Hamas, and it's really at the center of Hamas's doctrine and its concept of operations. The underground network is what facilitates Hamas's military activities. That is where the operatives seek shelter. That is how they hide from IDF reach. That is how they move from one location to the other. That is how they control and manage the operations. That is how they supply their operations. That is how they provide the rockets to the rocket launchers, which fire towards Israel. In short, it's really the backbone of Hamas's system, and hence its importance. We've been analyzing that system for quite some time, and over the last few days, since the last Friday, have been attacking that system from the air, obviously, trying to hit the infrastructure, which is underground, obviously under civilian infrastructure, and we've been trying to hit it at locations that have the least impact on civilian infrastructure, and most importantly, life. But of course, you see lots of damage. Why? Because we have struck most of the areas of the metro network that we've struck is under roads. Obviously, when there's a choice whether to strike infrastructure under houses, directly under houses, or under a road, we prefer to strike the road, since the obvious adverse effects of striking a populated house in Gaza. That is an effort that has been ongoing. We continue with that effort, and we will continue. And the assessment is that that effort will be expanded to areas that we so far have not conducted this effort in, and that is to be expected over the coming days. In terms of other main activities, I'll say something about two events yesterday, which are important for those who aren't following events very closely, but it ties into the bigger picture. Yesterday, Hamas tried to launch quite an important attack using a submersible naval vessel, which they tried to launch at sea, obviously with a military target. We were able to intercept it through advanced warning, intelligence, and a good cooperation with between the Navy and different fire assets, the Air Force. And eventually they were able to strike that submersible vehicle before the naval unit of Hamas was able to deploy it. And we were also able to strike the operators as they were trying to disengage from the area. So that was a successful thwarting of another attempt by Hamas to execute what we call a special attack. In addition to that, a senior Palestinian Islamic Jihad military commander was targeted successfully yesterday. He was the commander of the northern Gaza region in the Islamic Jihad, and he will no longer continue to operate against Israel. Those efforts continue. We are over the day, we have been able to strike a number of rocket crews that have been trying to fire rockets at Israel. And what we are continuing to do is again our offensive efforts. Most of the fire last night was focused on the Rimal neighborhood, where Hamas has extensive infrastructure hidden underneath the civilian infrastructure, and hence our operations there. I'd like to say a general, not a statement, but generally refer to the issue of non-combatants. Our assessments, our conservative assessments, and this is the same figure that I said yesterday, we have not yet updated it, but we assess based on different sources, both civilian and intel sources, that the number of enemy combatants that we have been able to kill is 130. That is the lowest, the most conservative figure. It is likely that the figure is higher, but that is the lowest conservative number of any combatants, Hamas and Islamic Jihad together. That is without taking into account the amount of terrorists that might have died in our first strike on the underground infrastructure in the northeastern part of the Gaza Strip last week. In terms of posture ahead, as long as rocket fire continues, it is very clear from an IDF point of view, and maybe the Ministry of Foreign Affairs can update on the national diplomatic level, but from an IDF point of view, as long as Hamas and Islamic Jihad are firing rockets at our civilians, which they are doing as we speak, and they did, unfortunately, with significant effect just an hour and a half ago, the topic of any de-escalation is obviously not on the table. And we continue to operate and to prepare for various scenarios, not looking to escalate the situation, but of course responding to the fact that our civilians are held hostage by a terrorist organization. I think it is the very basic expectation of a military, of a sovereign state, to defend its citizens, to defend its sovereignty. That's what we're doing. We're doing it by various means, both by using the world's most advanced weapon system, and I've heard claims and jokes and opinion papers written and spoken about, well, you have the Iron Dome, so it's okay that rockets are fired at you. So no, we don't need to apologize for having a great system that defends our civilians. We spent money and effort and time in developing it because the lives of our civilians are important. And as such, priorities on the other side are probably just the opposite. Money goes to producing rockets, tunnels, and underneath the tunnel networks underneath the cities, which do not serve the good purposes of the population, but only serve the military and hostile or offensive purposes of Hamas. Last word before we'll open up for a few quick questions. Our emphasis is to engage with the enemy, with enemy combatants, and to degrade enemy capabilities, various types of capabilities. We try to degrade their R&D capabilities, and so far we have been very successful at degrading Hamas's rocket and R&D capabilities, and they will have a significant challenge in the future, developing rockets that they are firing now. We have been hunting terrorist senior operatives, and we've been successful in striking a sizable amount of senior operatives, part of the general staff of Hamas, but not limited to them only. We have been striking infrastructure targets, the tunnels, etc. We've been striking rocket launchers all over the Gaza Strip, so far with limited success, but we are getting better at locating the rocket launchers and immediately closing what we call circuits of fire. That means a spotting device that sees where the rocket is fired from, and then an attacking device that engages with the target and disables it. We've done that successfully more and more, specifically with the multi-barrel systems that Hamas has dispersed all over the Gaza Strip. We have struck the storage facilities of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, mostly for rockets, and as I said, the so-called metro underground system. However, we focus on militants, on enemy combatants. We try our best not to strike civilians. We try our best to avoid civilian casualties, and this I want to make abundantly clear. Our aim is not to adversely affect in any way civilians. We try to minimize the effect on civilians whenever we can, wherever feasible. We take all precautions at our disposal, and we do a lot of preliminary assessment of military targets, trying to minimize collateral damage wherever possible, whenever feasible. I'll leave it at that, and we'll open it for a few questions.
Yes.
Two questions for Jonathan. You've said from the beginning that a high number of rockets have fallen short and caused casualties within the Gaza Strip. Are you planning to release any proof of that other than your statements? That's question number one. Question number two, you mentioned limited success in terms of stopping the rocket fire. Could you elaborate on the challenge? Because obviously rocket fire is continuing into Israel.
So regarding proof, not specifically related to your question, but many times journalists and civilians demand proof for this or that. That is not always feasible, and we're not the only military that operates in that way. There's various sources and limitations, but we are hoping to do that tomorrow in terms of a few maps and parts of one of our command and control systems, one of our interception systems, which we are going to show tomorrow. Journalists who are going to come to invited to a briefing tomorrow, we will show examples of rockets that were fired from within the Gaza Strip and landed short inside the Gaza Strip, and we will show it to a select group of correspondents who will be invited tomorrow to a briefing, so I'll leave it to them. And regarding the challenge of rocket fire, listen, that's a challenge that we've been facing for 20 years. We just, or some in Israel, unfortunately, mostly those who live in southern Israel, just commemorated the sad milestone of 20 years of rocket and mortar fire towards Israeli civilians, specifically in southern Israel, Sderot, and other communities nearby. And of course, as time went by, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Beersheba, and other cities in the south. It is a significant military challenge. All militaries face it in different capacities, and the main part of the challenge lies in the fact that all of the rocket infrastructure is embedded either within or directly close to civilian infrastructure, and it's very difficult to detect. Even if we have a very good understanding of the whereabouts, the general location, to strike the rocket launcher before it launches is challenging, and it is something that we're constantly improving on, but still not have achieved. We still have not achieved the end state. Of course, end state would be that the enemy has no ability to fire rockets at our civilians. We're not there yet, so we are degrading other supporting capabilities that support enemy operations. Yes, next question.
One second, if I may add to your first question, there are Palestinian NGOs that are working within the Gaza Strip that are publishing information about missiles that were launched from the Gaza Strip and fell short within the Gaza Strip and caused casualties, death, including kids. This is I don't remember the name of I think the Children Defense or something like that. If you want this information, please contact us and we'll give it to you. Those are NGOs working within the Gaza Strip, obviously with the Palestinians. So we, as Jonathan said, we can't really always give Defense for Children. Sorry, that's the name of the organization. And we can't really give a proof for any missile that fell short in the Gaza Strip, but you have evidence from people in the Gaza Strip. And we'll to the second question. I don't see a name, I see a number, but I think you know what I'm referring to.
Can you tell us whether or not you will be able to provide any information about the intelligence that you say was passed to the U.S. on what happened to the media tower and the claim that there were Hamas military intelligence and R&D in that tower? Was that passed to CIA? Was that passed to anyone in the State Department? There's been a lot of confusion on the U.S. side as to who received that and what the credibility is. Would that be part of the briefing tomorrow as well? And can you also speak to the claims that with precision weaponry that you now have, why have there been so many misfires regarding civilian casualties if Israel has so many precision weapons?
Okay, so the first one is a bit more straightforward. I can tell you that I know that the information has been passed on at working levels. I'm not at liberty to say exactly by whom and to whom in the US, but I know for certain that it has been delivered by an Israeli representative to his American counterparts, and it has happened. It obviously happened in the last, I think it is between 12 and 24 hours. That's as specific as I can be. Unfortunately, I don't have more information than that, but I think that the official statements have been made by the Secretary of State and maybe others. But I won't go into them specifically. You can read them, obviously, without my assistance. Second thing, the precision. I mean, we haven't had misfire events. We've had certain events where there have been civilian casualties, unfortunate, unintended civilian casualties that occurred in a way that, or as a result, an unexpected result of some type of an attack. I'll give you one example, which an unfortunate one. Again, in the Rimal neighborhood, we conducted extensive strikes 2 nights ago on the tunnel network. And in one of the many locations, in one of the dozens of locations where we bombed the tunnels, the metro tunnels, in one of the locations, the tunnel, the military target, collapsed, causing houses near the tunnel, the supporting structure of those houses also collapsed, and that caused a large amount of civilian casualties, which were not the aim, and something that we looked into, reviewed, and are adjusting the analysis and the ordnance used in the future. It's not a totally mathematical exercise in choosing the ordnance, etc. But bottom line, that type of event, and I suppose that's what you were referring to, is something that we aspire to minimize and not to have at all. And we struck that same night, as I said, dozens of targets, and that was the only location where it happened. So it was abnormal. But we looked into it and assessed, and we definitely hope, and we took active measures to make the chances of such an event in the future smaller.
Yes, hi. You said that the aim is to, sorry, I should introduce myself. I'm from the BBC. You said the aim is to degrade Hamas's military capabilities. So does this mean that Israel's concluded that it can't destroy, or it's not aiming to destroy what Hamas and others in Gaza are capable of doing?
No, degrading is the type of action, and we haven't said publicly how much we are aspiring to degrade, but obviously we want to degrade as much as possible of Hamas's military capabilities that threaten Israeli civilians. So the fact that we say that we intend to degrade military capabilities, the purpose of that is, one, to clarify to anybody who harbors other views or understandings of our military activity, that's the focus, to degrade the capabilities of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad so that in the future they will pose less of a threat against Israeli civilians. And we haven't said, we've reached, I think, very good levels of impact on enemy capabilities in terms of R&D. We're happy with the level there, but there is still a lot of work to do in terms of their underground infrastructure and in terms of the capacity to fire rockets. At this stage, still, unfortunately, if Hamas decides to fire rockets at Tel Aviv, unfortunately, they still have the capacity to do so, both in terms of launchers and in terms of rockets and the general supply system that supports it.
Hi there. Thank you for this briefing. I wanted to ask, in the past, Palestinian casualty and death figures have been proven to be quite inaccurate, but usually long after the operation concludes. Can you give any real-time figures from the Israeli side of how many deaths, especially of minors, you're aware of in the Gaza Strip that might be more accurate than those given by the Gaza Health Ministry?
Yeah, so I've said in the past, I think it was yesterday, that we have our doubts as to the veracity of information by the Gaza Health Ministry. This is based on past experiences in 2014 specifically, but also before that, where we know of specific efforts to inflate the number of so-called civilian casualties and to minimize or otherwise make disappear the number of combatants aged 20 to 30, males, and to list as many injuries and deaths as possible, to even things that aren't related to Israel, to tag them as Israeli. So that is definitely something that we are aware of. We're analyzing the numbers, and it takes time. As you said correctly, last confrontation, 2014, I think our intelligence units were able to cross-reference and verify all of the casualties. It took a lot of time, and we found discrepancies, and we made them public. I don't remember exactly the percentage. We're looking into the information, the information made official by the Gaza Health Ministry now, and we've started to cross-reference and verify. I think one of the clearest examples would be on the first night of fighting last Monday, when rockets were fired from Gaza towards Israel, and one of the rockets, according to what we understand, landed short in Beit Hanun, northern Gaza, and struck a house and caused the death of caused a significant amount of casualties, almost an entire family. Hamas was very quick to blame Israel for it, but it took some time, and then also Palestinian there's a few very brave, and I say that without cynicism, Palestinian civil rights or civil society organizations that tweeted about it and said this was a rocket fired from Hamas, this wasn't an Israeli attack. And I hope that they're well after that brave statement. Usually people who either speak up against Hamas or take pictures against Hamas, they don't fare well in Gaza. Probably that's also one of the same reasons why we don't see many pictures of armed Hamas personnel during fighting. For some reason, they all disappear, and there's no pictures in Western media, no agencies picture uniformed men. And for some odd reasons, we don't see rockets being fired from all of the civilian areas in the media either. We have our assessments as to why that is, but that's just an observation.
There were some reports from the United Nations overnight about 6 hospitals that were damaged and 9 primary healthcare centers damaged in Gaza. I know, as you've said many times, that you are targeting military targets and not civilians and not civilian buildings, but I was wondering if there are any is there any information you have of what happened? Is there any special precautions you've taken when targeting other targets nearby healthcare facilities?
Obviously, yes, healthcare facilities, mosques, schools, hospitals, infrastructure, water and electricity, they are all loaded into our system, and they are marked as sensitive infrastructure that must not be targeted and must not be affected by our fire. And that's in general, and that I've seen it many times myself, the way it's input into our systems, both of the Air Force and the operations. Everybody who has any type of kinetic capability, they have that same layer of sensitive facilities. So yes, obviously we take precautions. I know that you filed the query some time ago, considerable time ago. Unfortunately, I do not yet have an answer as to specifically what happened at those clinics. Working on it. As soon as we'll have it, we'll provide. Categorically, I can say, of course, we try to minimize any damage to any sensitive facilities and to civilians in general.
Jonathan, I wanted to just nail down some numbers. It's been reported, anonymously sourced, that you thought the arsenal in Hamas's possession is more than 12,000, and they fired about 3,200. Can you give us a confirmation of that 12,000 figure, and how many do you think are remaining that I assume the IDF would like to see destroyed to buy time, at least a couple of years, is what you mentioned on the last briefing?
So the number is close enough to our estimate. It's not too far. Like everything in life, it depends a bit how you count, but that's the approximate amount of rockets and mortars that are in the Gaza Strip, Hamas and Islamic Jihad combined.
12,000-ish.
Yeah, around that number. So that's why I said that if Hamas still wants to go down the road of continuing to fire rockets and suffer the consequences of that, then they still have the ability to do so. They still have enough rockets to fire, and they unfortunately still have the rocket launchers. So that's the estimate. And of course, yes, it's very difficult to degrade all of those rockets and to interdict or otherwise destroy them. They're very dispersed. Hamas has been wise in dispersing its infrastructure, and there is no main hub or storage facility where Hamas houses all of its rockets. There's many places, all of them underneath civilian facilities, almost all of them underground. The few that were above ground, we've attacked and struck already successfully. So there's a lot underground in that same tunnel network that we've spoken about. So before I leave you, just a last word. Hopefully, some kind of positive outcome or solution may come in the near days. We don't know in the IDF. From our perspective, we continue to operate. As long as they fire rockets at us, we obviously are totally compelled and committed to continue to defend our civilians. Thankful of the Iron Dome and its amazing interception rate of more than 90%. Last thing that I didn't say, the pace of, or maybe I spoke about it, but the pace of rockets is the highest that we've faced in our history. In terms of the amount of rockets faced over a short period of time, I just wanted to reiterate that for those who joined the line. So I apologize for not being able to stay on longer and take more questions, but I have to move on to another commitment. Thank you very much. Lior, back to you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and we really appreciate your time. You know, we know that you're busy those days. Thank you so much. And we'll move on to our next speaker today from the international spokesperson for the Israeli police, Rosenfeld. Mickey.
As I was saying, the Israeli National Police is continuing its activities and operations across the country at the same time as the IDF is working and continuing around the area of the Gaza Strip and dealing with the threats and ongoing threats of the Hamas. The implications of the rockets that are being fired into Israel, we're seeing throughout the southern region today as well, where the majority of strikes were in the area of around the Ashdod, Ashkelon area and around the Gaza Strip, more or less at the closer ranges. Unfortunately, which resulted also in the death of 2 local Thailand workers and a further 5 being taken to hospital after the sirens went off, but unfortunately they were injured as well as being killed at the scene. Our units responded in the area and examined the type of rocket that had landed. In and around the area of Tel Aviv, Rishon LeZion, south of Tel Aviv, our police units are continuing to patrol, are continuing to be on standby for the possibility of rockets that can affect the central region as well. That's something based on the assessments that we've understand with the IDF. There is still a realistic situation where those rockets can land and the sirens will continue to go off in the area of Tel Aviv. So we're continuing to focus and make sure that we have enough units mobilized in the different areas. At the same time, we've carried out a number of security assessments with the leaders and the mayors of the cities to make sure that the message is continuing to get across to the public about going into the safe zones and safe areas. And we know how absolutely critical it is due to the fact that the Iron Dome is carrying out tremendous work and is succeeding in taking down the majority of rockets that are aimed in the populated areas. But we do understand and we do know that if 120 rockets or over 50, 60 rockets are fired into those populated areas, there is still a percentage of rockets that will make their way through into those populated areas. And therefore, it's absolutely critical that people take their steps and actions and go into those safe zones and safe areas. That is what is saving lives at the moment. And that is what we're focusing on in terms of what is happening around the Gaza Strip towards the Tel Aviv area and the situation with the ongoing rockets. In terms of the Israeli National Police, we're continuing as well to focus on making sure that we can prevent and respond to incidents that are taking place. Based on the indications that we have and the intelligence that we have, we're seeing that there are still ongoing disturbances and sporadic incidences that are taking place from the north in the Akko area, Wadi Ara in the central area. And also what we saw over the last few hours, a number of demonstrations taking place in Jerusalem, also around the Sheikh Jarrah area. From what we understand is there is a slight shift from the Israeli Arab areas in the north now back to Jerusalem, which we weren't seeing over the last few days. And once again, just as I said a while ago, our units responded by using non-lethal weapons and dispersing a number of protests that were taking place both at the Damascus Gate as well as in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. We're calling upon the leaders also in Jerusalem and the different community members to calm the situation down as much as possible. In connection with the situation taking place in terms of number of arrests and ongoing activities, the Israeli National Police have arrested. First of all, in connection with the incident that took place in Jaffa, where that young 12-year-old boy was taken to hospital in serious condition when a petrol bomb was thrown at 4 houses. We have arrested one suspect who is an Israeli Arab man. What we understand as part of that ongoing investigation, it was a misidentification, and that suspect is still being questioned, but that's a significant breakthrough in connection with that ongoing investigation. With the second major incident that happened in Bat Yam, which was seen over social media as well, 6 suspects have been arrested for also attacking an Israeli Arab man. And our activities and investigations will continue in order to find further suspects. More than 1,050 suspects have been arrested across the country in just 8 days of violence that have taken place. And in terms of the number of people that have been killed in internal violence, we've seen that there was one Israeli man who passed away, unfortunately, yesterday, who he was beaten in the city of Lod. We are still searching for suspects and hoping to find all of those suspects. We're working closely together with the Israeli police and Shabak, the ISA, on that. And also other developments that took place is on the issue of the arrest that was also made in connection with the man, as I said, who was killed. That was one issue. And the second issue is the 3 suspects that are still being held, who are in connection with the first initial incident that happened in Lod, when one Israeli Arab was shot and he was killed as well. So in general, I would say that as far as we understand, heightened security is continuing, both over the next few days. The festival of Shavuot, the Jewish festival, was relatively calm and relatively quiet. But there's no doubt over the last 24 hours, we're seeing an increase in incidents that have taken place inside the Israeli Arab communities across the country that we've responded to. In the West Bank as well, today there were a number of severe incidents that happened, a number of demonstrations which are on the seam line of the Palestinian areas, near Ramallah, for example, where there were outbreaks of violence, and not just rocks and petrol bombs that were thrown at our border police and IDF officers as well, but there was also a number of shooting incidents that have taken place. There are also threats that we're receiving about the possibility of further terrorist attacks in and around Judea and Samaria. So no doubt, I think that heightened security will continue there as well. But I can confirm the situation is under control. There are enough officers and border police and tactical units that have been mobilized in all of the different areas. Number 1, as I said, down south, to be ready to respond to rockets that could be fired. Number 2, to deal with the problems and ongoing incidents that have erupted between the Israeli Arab community. And third of all, in joint coordination with the IDF, our units are mobilized to respond to further incidents that could take place in and around the different areas of the West Bank. That is the general security situation in terms of the Israeli National Police. If there are any questions, of course, I'm willing to take them now. Please go.
Hi there, Mickey. It's Rohit Katru from ITV News. You touched on it there briefly, but I wondered if you could say more about the events today in Ramallah. The IDF say that 2 soldiers were injured by gunfire during some unrest. What more can you tell us about what happened there this afternoon and about the police involvement there? Thanks a lot.
Yes. In general, first of all, the IDF are in charge and responsible for the situation around the West Bank Palestinian areas. There were IDF personnel that were there. And during a demonstration, which we normally deal with almost on a daily basis, where it can be tens of people or hundreds of people or even thousands of people, what took place is that shots were also fired from within inside the area of those that have gathered. And that is something that hasn't happened for a long time. So there is no doubt an increase in the level of violence. And we're hoping that the Palestinian security circles will take control of the situation and prevent future incidents such as that from taking place. But in general, in and around the areas where we're seeing that there are demonstrations, our units, IDF as well, border police, they're there, they're on site. They're responding according to the level of violence. When petrol bombs are thrown, we use stun grenades. And if anything more major happens, then we react and respond according to the level of violence and the threats that take place.
Mickey, I was asking about Sheikh Jarrah. You said in your statement earlier that there were people calling for incitement to terror. All I heard while I was in Sheikh Jarrah was people calling for freedom in a chant. So do you know exactly what they were saying? And
First of all, okay.
The second part of the question is that I witnessed police firing rubber bullets at unarmed civilians who were standing dozens of meters away. So if you could just clarify the police approach to proportional use of force. Thank you.
First of all, the Israeli National Police are located in all of the different areas, and we confirm that. If necessary, there'll be extra units also in Jerusalem this evening. We are seeing a shift in the demonstrations. We're seeing demonstrations in Haifa, and in connection with what you asked about Sheikh Jarrah, police units as well as undercover units were in and around the different area. We know what is planned. We know what is scheduled to go down. We responded and reacted. Our units don't use rubber bullets in any way whatsoever. Our officers, if necessary, they do respond with non-lethal weapons, and that means police mounted on horses, which you've seen over the last few days in the area of Damascus Gate and on the main Salah ad-Din road. Our units as well use stun grenades in order to disperse and prevent injuries from both of our officers as well as those that are protesting. And when petrol bombs are thrown at our officers directly, as we've seen in the different neighborhoods in Jerusalem, they respond only by using a soft sponge bullet, it's called, which is a non-lethal weapon, which has been used for many years and does not cause damage when it's only used at a certain range. So we're taking all necessary steps in order to make sure that, number one, our police units are in and around the areas. We want to prevent any major incidents from happening between the individuals, the family, both Jewish as well as Israeli Arab families that are living very close. In fact, not just neighborhood to neighborhood, but they're living literally apartment to apartment, literally door to door. And therefore, it's absolutely critical that our officers are located there. Let's not forget that after yesterday's terrorist attack at the entrance of Sheikh Jarrah, which just goes and indicates how much of a danger there is to our officers, there were concrete blocks that were put up in the area for our own personal safety of our officers. Luckily, nobody was killed yesterday. So the tensions, I would say, are relatively high, and our units will continue to be focusing on Sheikh Jarrah. We are asking those that want to come and demonstrate in a quiet and a respectable and a law-abiding manner. They are allowed to do that as they've done and are doing in any other area of Jerusalem as well. If it's coordinated with the Israeli police, then our police officers will be there. But if there'll be illegal demonstrations and incitement and individuals that are attacking either families or police officers, any law enforcement around the world will respond, and any law make sure that they have the tensions.
Hi, Mickey. Thank you very much. Could you, of the number of suspects you arrested, how many of them were Jewish and how many were Arab citizens of Israel? Could you give us?
Yes, I won't go into specific numbers, but I can tell you that the majority of people that are arrested were Israeli Arabs, and I'm talking about more than 3/4. That's the approximate number on a national level. But police have been arresting anyone who has been involved in incitement or anyone who has been involved in taking on the streets. Our units arrest those individuals immediately, no differentiation whatsoever between a Jewish man who wants to retaliate or Israeli Arabs that are taking on the streets and trying to attack police officers or women or children or families. There's no differentiation whatsoever in terms of police activities. I can also tell you that we're using technology. We've added drones that we're using around different areas to cover geographically and have the indications of who is taking to the streets and when, as well as in and around the area of Lod, because the situation is very complicated and even somewhat claustrophobic with inside the neighborhoods. I was there today. It's absolutely necessary to have an overall perspective and view from the air as well. And that we're doing so by using drones to see who are in the gardens, who are in the outer areas, who are in between the buildings. And that is to prevent major incidents from happening there as well. We're also, and that's an important emphasis, trying to pick up and find weapons. We are searching house to house based on indications that we have based on intelligence, and we're going to continue to do so over the next few days as well.
Yes, sorry, I'm just going to go back to the incidents in the West Bank today, if I may. So I got slightly distracted by a phone call, so please forgive me if you address this question. And give a question to somebody else. But there were shots fired you say from within the protesters, and 2 IDF soldiers were killed. So were injured.
No, I never said killed. I never said killed.
Injured. So no, sorry, my fault. Injured. But we've also seen reports that 1 Palestinian man was killed, and several more, perhaps 16, were injured by bullets and perhaps other things as well. Did that return fire come from the IDF, or is the suggestion that they were all injured by the firing from within the Palestinian side, so to speak? Was there return IDF fire?
All I can confirm as the police spokesman is not the IDF spokesman, and you'll have to speak to Jonathan personally about that and ask him. But the details I understand and what we know, because the soldiers were taken to Shari Tzedek Hospital and treated there, is that 2 officers were shot. That type of incident we haven't seen over the last, at least, where there is a protest, which can be the level of violence that we deal with and the level of attacks that we deal with has been until now on the level of petrol bombs, and even we've seen pipe bombs that were used. But from in and around areas where there is a protest, and the protesters know that there are IDF officers and border police officers that are standing in front of them several hundred meters away in order to respond if necessary, and then shots being fired, live ammunition. I'm not talking about 5.56 bullets, but 7.72. We're talking about obviously from either Kalach weapons. That is something that we haven't seen in a long time. And it's tremendously important that we respond accordingly and contain those incidents. We, of course, want there to be a minimum amount of incidents that will take place, but we know there are dangers to our officers. We know those are the friction areas. We know they are the flashpoints as well. And we're working closely together, both the Israeli police, border police, and IDF.
From your knowledge, was there a response, proportionate or not? Was there some response from the Israeli side?
The response and the tactics that take place both by the Israeli National Police, border police, and the IDF is according to the level of threat and the level of dangers. And that you have to understand when you're standing in front of thousands of people who are throwing petrol bombs at you and opening fire. So the response is according to level of threat. If there are peaceful protests and you see people that are approaching a certain area and it's coordinated, there's not a problem whatsoever if people want to demonstrate. We've seen demonstrations within areas inside Jerusalem that we've dealt with that have been peaceful. If there are peaceful demonstrations, the Israeli police will be on standby and they won't even respond if necessary. But as soon as there is any break of the law, as soon as there is any attacks on officers or any danger to the public, then our units will respond according to the level of violence. And that is what takes place also in Judea and Samaria.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being. I know there are other people who wanted to ask questions, but we'll keep doing these briefings in the next few days. Thank you, keep safe.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.